The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor like a gunshot in the silence. I was on my knees in seconds, my gloved hands carefully collecting the ceramic pieces while the bitter liquid spread across the pristine floor I'd spent 40 minutes perfecting. The three men in $1,000 suits stood above me, their laughter echoing off the glass walls of the break room like the caw of vultures. "Look at that," the tallest one said, adjusting his Rolex. "She's actually cleaning it up, didn't even hesitate." This was my life at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. This was the moment everything changed, though none of us knew it yet, especially not them. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here. Kneeling on a floor worth more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. Being treated like I was invisible, like I was nothing. Because the beginning of this story, it started 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days ago when I made a decision that would reshape everything. My name is Isabella Martinez Chen, and I'm about to tell you the most expensive lesson in respect I've ever given. It was 4:15 a.m. when my alarm went off that Tuesday morning. Just like every morning for the past 97 days, the apartment was still dark. The city's still sleeping outside my windows on the 40th floor of Trump Tower. I rolled out of bed, my muscles protesting from yesterday's real work. The kind that left your back aching and your hands raw. Despite the gloves, I padded to the bathroom, catching my reflection in the mirror. Isabella Martinez Chen, 28 years old, MBA from Wharton, CEO of Chen Industries with a net worth that Forbes estimated at somewhere north of $8 billion. The woman in the mirror looked tired. She looked like she'd been carrying the weight of the world for 3 months, because she had been. I brushed my teeth with the same routine I'd developed over these months, quick, efficient, no wasted motion. By 4:30, I was pulling on the navy blue uniform of Chicago Premium Cleaning Services. The polyester fabric felt rough against my skin, so different from the silk blouses and tailored suits that used to be my armor, but this uniform had become something else entirely. It had become my camouflage. The name tag read Maria Gonzalez. It was pinned crooked on purpose. I'd learned that perfect presentation made people suspicious in this job. They expected us to be a little sloppy, a little careless with ourselves. It made them more comfortable to think we didn't care about details. They were wrong about that. I cared about every single detail. By 5 a.m., I was pulling my 15-year-old Honda Civic into the employee parking garage beneath the Meridian Financial Building. The Civic was a beautiful touch, rusted around the edges, a crack in the windshield. Interior that smelled faintly of the pine air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. I'd bought it specifically for this role, paying cash from account. The company would never trace back to me. The parking garage was already half full with the cars of the early shift security guards, maintenance crew, food service workers. These were my people now, at least on the surface. We nodded to each other in the fluorescent-lit underground, all of us preparing for another day of being functionally invisible to the people who worked above us. Morning, Maria called Carlos, one of the night security guards heading home. He was 63, had been working security for 30 years, and had grandchildren he showed pictures of to anyone who'd listen. The executives called him boy when they bothered to acknowledge him at all. It made my stomach turn every time I heard it. Morning, Carlos. How was your night? Quiet, thank God. You have a good day, Mija. I grabbed my cart from the supply room: mop, bucket, vacuum, cleaning supplies, trash bags, the tools of my temporary trade. Everything organized exactly how I'd learned from Rosa, the woman who'd trained me when I started. Rosa had been cleaning offices for 22 years, supporting 3 kids and sending money back to her mother in El Salvador. She'd taught me that there was dignity in honest work, no matter what form it took. The secret, she'd told me during my first week, is to be invisible but not forgotten. They need to trust that you'll do good work, but they can't be uncomfortable with you being there. It's a balance, you know. I knew. I'd been walking that balance for 3 months now. The elevator to the 15th floor was empty at 5:10 a.m. I watched the numbers climb, thinking about the real reason I was here. Meridian Financial, one of the most innovative investment firms in the Midwest, with assets under management approaching $50 billion. Robert Meridian had built something impressive from nothing, and now he was looking for a partner to help take it to the next level. Chen Industries had been circling this opportunity for 8 months. My team had done the financial analysis, the market research, the competitive assessment. Everything looked perfect on paper. But my father had taught me something that Harvard Business School never could. Numbers lie. But people don't, not when they think no one important is watching. So I'd made a decision that had my board of directors questioning my sanity. Instead of sending in consultants and analysts, instead of relying on reports and presentations, I decided to see Meridian Financial from the inside, from the bottom up. I'd bought Chicago Premium Cleaning Services 6 months ago through a shell company. It took another month to get them the contract from Meridian Financial. And then I'd done something that would have made the Wall Street Journal. If they'd known about it, I'd gone undercover as a cleaning lady in the company. I was planning to acquire. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 15th floor. The executive level. Corner offices with views of Lake Michigan. Conference rooms where million-dollar deals were negotiated. And a break room where I was about to have an encounter that would change everything. I pushed my cart down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The walls were lined with awards, framed articles from financial magazines, photos of Robert Meridian shaking hands with celebrities and politicians. This was a company proud of its success, and rightfully so. But success, I'd learned, could make people forget where they came from. The break room was my first stop. Like always, it was a beautiful space granite countertops, top-of-the-line coffee machines, a view of the city that most people would kill for. I'd cleaned this room every morning for 3 months, usually in blessed silence. The executives didn't start arriving until 8 a.m., giving me plenty of time to work in peace. Today it was different. I was emptying the trash can near the window when I heard voices in the hallway. Male voices, loud and confident. The kind of voices that belonged to people who'd never doubted their place in the world. Closed the Peterson deal yesterday. $23 million in fees. Just like that. Beautiful. Robert's going to love those numbers. Speaking of Robert, did you see his new Bentley? Guy's got taste. I'll give him that. They were getting closer. I glanced at the clock. 5:43 a.m. They were here early, probably prepping for a big meeting. I considered leaving, coming back later, but something made me stay. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. The three of them walked into the break room like they owned it, which, in a way, they did. I recognized them from my research. James Webb, 34, Senior Vice President, Harvard MBA, drove a BMW M5 and lived in a Lincoln Park penthouse. Marcus Chen, 31, Vice President of Acquisitions, Wharton graduate like myself, though he'd finished 3 years behind me. And David Rodriguez, 29, rising star in the investment division, Northwestern Kellogg, already making Senior VP money despite his age. On paper, these were Meridian Financial's golden boys, the future of the company. Robert Meridian's protégés. In person, they were something else entirely. They were talking about the Peterson deal, congratulating each other when James Webb noticed me. I was bent over the trash can doing my job, minding my own business, but something about my presence seemed to irritate him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone that immediately puts you on edge. "How long are you going to be in here?" I looked up, making eye contact for just a second before looking away. "Just finishing up." "Sir, 2 minutes." 2 minutes, Marcus repeated, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "You hear that, boys? She's on a schedule." They thought this was funny. 3 grown men, college-educated, professionally successful, finding humor in a cleaning lady trying to do her job efficiently. I continued working, muscle memory taking over while my mind cataloged every word, every gesture, every revealing moment. "You know what?" James said suddenly, walking over to the coffee machine. "I think I need some coffee. You don't mind waiting, do you, sweetheart?" The coffee machine was one of those fancy Italian espresso makers that cost more than most people's monthly salary. James made a show of using it, taking his time, clearly enjoying the fact that he was making me wait. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when he finished making his coffee, took a sip, made a face like it wasn't quite right, and then deliberately, intentionally, with full knowledge of what he was doing, dropped the ceramic cup right in front of me. "Oops," he said, not sounding sorry at all. The cup shattered against the marble floor, sending coffee and ceramic fragments across the space I just finished cleaning. The sound echoed in the break room like a small explosion, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then they started laughing. "Hey lady, clean my office too," James said, his voice booming with amusement. "Since you're so good at cleaning up messes." I bent down and started picking up the pieces, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't carelessness. This was cruelty, pure and simple. This was a demonstration of power, a reminder of hierarchy, a way of saying I matter and you don't without using those exact words. "Look at that," Marcus said, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "She didn't even complain, just started cleaning. That's what I call good service, professional." David agreed. "I bet she doesn't even speak English. Do you speak English, sweetheart?" I kept picking up ceramic pieces, my smile hidden beneath the surgical mask I wore. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, words she'd whispered to me when I was 7 years old and crying because some kids at school had made fun of my lunch. "Mija, sometimes you have to let people think they're winning. Sometimes the best revenge is letting them show everyone who they really are." "I don't think she understands us," James said, raising his voice like volume would somehow bridge a language barrier that didn't exist. "English? Do you speak English?" I looked up at him, my eyes wide and innocent, and shook my head slightly. It was a lie. Obviously, I'd given the valedictorian speech at Wharton in English, had negotiated billion-dollar deals in English, had been interviewed by CNBC and Bloomberg in English, but right now, I was Maria Gonzalez, and Maria Gonzalez was just trying to get through her day without causing trouble. They found this hilarious. "Well, at least she's good at taking orders," James said, gesturing toward me as I continued cleaning. "Look at her go. Didn't even need to be told twice. Probably scared she'll lose her job." Marcus added, "These people, they need the work, you know. Can't afford to be picky, these people." As if I were a different species, as if my humanity was somehow lesser because I was holding a mop instead of a briefcase. I finished cleaning up the coffee and ceramic, disposed of the mess, and pulled out my mop to clean the floor properly. They watched me work like I was entertainment, making comments about my technique, joking about whether I'd do as good a job on their offices. "You think she's legal?" David asked, lowering his voice. "But not enough. I mean, working in the country legally. Does it matter?" James replied. "Half these cleaning companies, they don't ask too many questions. Cheap labor, no benefits, no complaints. It's a beautiful system." I mopped around their feet, invisible and ignored except when they wanted to remind me of my place. They talked about their weekend plans. James was flying to Miami for a bachelor party. Marcus had tickets to a Cubs game. David was taking his girlfriend to some exclusive restaurant in River North. Their lives were full of privilege and possibility, and they wore that privilege like armor. But privilege, I'd learned, could also be a blindfold. "We should get going," Marcus said, checking his Rolex. "Meeting starts in 15 minutes, right?" The Harrison acquisition. James straightened his tie, already shifting back into professional mode. "This one's going to make us a fortune." They started to leave, but James paused at the doorway. He looked back at me, still mopping, still invisible, and something sparked in his eyes. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was cruelty. Maybe it was just the casual indifference of someone who'd never been powerless in their life. He walked back to the counter, grabbed a handful of sugar packets, and scattered them across the floor I'd just cleaned. "Missed a spot," he said with a grin. Then he took out his phone and pretended to accidentally knock over the napkin dispenser, sending napkins fluttering across the wet floor like confetti. "Whoops, Butterfingers today." Marcus and David were cracking up, encouraging him. Taking pictures with their phones like this was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. James was playing to his audience now, knocking over the stir container, sweeping coffee grounds off the counter onto my clean floor. "You getting this?" he asked David, who was recording on his phone. "This is going straight to Instagram." When you're having a rough morning, but at least you're not the cleaning lady. I kept working, kept cleaning, kept smiling under my mask, because Maria Gonzalez needed this job, and Maria Gonzalez couldn't afford to make enemies. Maria Gonzalez was invisible, powerless, dependent on the goodwill of people who had already demonstrated. They had no goodwill to spare. But Isabella Martinez-Chan? She was taking notes. Every scattered napkin was evidence. Every cruel laugh was data. Every casual cruelty was another line item in a ledger. That would eventually come due. Same time tomorrow, Maria. James called out as they finally left, though. Maria wasn't my name, and he knew it. He'd deliberately chosen the most generic Hispanic name he could think of because to him, I wasn't a person. I was a stereotype, a service, a thing that cleaned up messes and made his life more convenient. I finished cleaning the break room in silence, my movements methodical and precise. The floor was spotless when I was done, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, perfect enough to eat off of. You'd never know that 15 minutes earlier. It had been deliberately trashed by 3 grown men who thought cruelty was entertainment. But I would remember every detail. I pushed my cart down the hallway, continuing my rounds. The 15th floor was coming alive now, phones ringing, printers humming. The first wave of employees arriving for another day of moving money around, making deals, building wealth, normal people doing normal jobs, most of them decent and polite when they encountered me in the hallways. But those three were different. And as I worked my way through the building, I started hearing stories from other employees. Rosa, who cleaned the 14th floor, told me about the time Marcus had made her reclaim his office because he didn't like how she'd arranged the papers on his desk. Not like that, Maria. He'd said, Jesus, don't they teach you people anything? Carlos, the security guard, mentioned how James always called him boy despite being 30 years younger. Hey boy, can you validate my parking? Or boy, tell them I'm here for the meeting. As if Carlos didn't have a name, didn't have grandchildren, didn't have 3 decades of experience. Keeping people safe, the pattern was clear. This wasn't isolated behavior. This was who they were when they thought no one important was watching. This was their true character, revealed in small moments of casual cruelty toward people they saw as beneath them. I was thinking about all of this when I heard it. The sound was unmistakable, deep, throaty, powerful. A V12 engine, the kind you only heard in supercars that cost more than most people's houses. It was coming from outside, getting closer, and something about it made me pause in my work. I was on the 10th floor now, mopping near the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of downtown Chicago. The morning sun was painting the buildings gold, reflecting off the glass and steel that reached toward the sky, like modern cathedrals to capitalism. And there, pulling up to the building's main entrance, was a matte black Lamborghini Huracan. Even from 10 floors up, the car was magnificent. It moved like liquid shadow, all curves and angles, stopping precisely in front of the glass doors that marked the entrance to Meridian Financial. The engine shut off, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then the driver's door opened. The man who got out was older, maybe 55, with silver hair that caught the morning light. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that had probably cost more than Maria Gonzalez made in 6 months. But there was something different about him, something in the way he moved, the way he carried himself, that spoke of earned authority rather than inherited privilege. Even from this distance, I could tell he was important. This wasn't someone who threw coffee cups on the floor for entertainment. This was someone who built companies, who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, who understood that real power came with real responsibility. He straightened his tie, locked the Lamborghini with a casual press of his key fob, and walked toward the building entrance with purpose. Every step was deliberate, confident, the walk of a man who knew exactly where he was going and why. I watched him disappear into the lobby, swallowed up by the building that bore his name, because I knew who he was even from 10 floors away, even without being able to see his face clearly. Or Robert Meridian, the founder, the man who'd built this empire from nothing, who'd started in a garage 30 years ago and now commanded assets worth $50 billion. The man I'd been trying to meet for 8 months. The man who held the key to Chen Industries' future expansion. The man who was about to learn something very important about the employees he trusted. To represent his company, I went back to mopping, but my mind was racing. Robert Meridian didn't make unscheduled visits to the office at 6:15 a.m. He didn't drive himself in his personal car unless something important was happening, and he definitely didn't show up without warning unless he had business that couldn't wait. 20 minutes later, I had my answer. I was cleaning the 10th floor conference rooms when I saw him again. This time, he wasn't alone. He was walking down the hallway with Patricia Hendricks, his executive assistant, and two other people I didn't recognize, a woman in a navy suit carrying a briefcase and a man with the kind of expensive haircut that screamed corporate lawyer. They were heading toward conference room B, where I could see through the glass walls that three familiar figures were having what looked like an important meeting. James, Marcus, and David were animated, confident, probably pitching the Harrison acquisition they'd mentioned earlier. They looked so sure of themselves, so untouchable in their tailored suits and expensive watches. James was standing at the head of the table, gesturing toward a presentation on the big screen. Marcus was taking notes on his laptop. David was nodding along, contributing to what was clearly a well-rehearsed pitch. They had no idea what was coming. Robert Meridian paused outside the conference room, said something quietly to Patricia, and then knocked once on the glass door. Before entering, I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see the immediate change in body language. James's confident gesture froze mid-motion. Marcus looked up from his laptop with confusion. David's nodding stopped abruptly. Whatever Robert was saying, it wasn't what they'd expected to hear. The conversation continued for several minutes. I pretended to clean the same spot on the floor over and over, keeping one eye on the meeting through the glass walls. The woman with the briefcase opened it and pulled out several documents. The lawyer was taking notes. Robert was asking questions, his expression serious. And the three golden boys of Meridian Financial were starting to look very uncomfortable. Finally, Robert stood up. He said something else, something that made all three of them sit up straighter. And then he turned toward the door, but instead of leaving, he scanned the hallway through the glass walls. His eyes found me for a moment. We looked at each other. Across the polished marble floor, Robert Meridian, billionaire founder of one of Chicago's most successful investment firms, and Maria Gonzalez, invisible cleaning lady with a mop and bucket, except I wasn't really Maria Gonzalez. And something in Robert Meridian's expression told me he knew exactly who I was. He walked out of the conference room, past his confused employees, past Patricia and the lawyer and the woman with the briefcase. He walked directly toward me, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet hallway. The entire floor seemed to shift. Conversations stopped. Assistants looked up from their desks. Other employees paused in their work to see why the founder of the company was walking across the floor with such purpose. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, close enough to smell the subtle cologne that probably cost more per ounce than most people made per hour. "Ma'am," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent floor. "They're ready for you in the boardroom." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a revelation, like the moment when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down. I looked past him toward conference room B, where James, Marcus, and David were staring through the glass walls with expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion, yes, but also something that looked like recognition, something that looked like fear. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and pulled off my cleaning gloves, first the right hand, then the left, setting them carefully on top of my cart. Then I straightened my back, rolling my shoulders back, letting my posture shift from invisible service worker to something else entirely. I reached up and pulled down my surgical mask, letting them see my face for the first time, really see it. Not the face of Maria Gonzalez, grateful immigrant worker, but the face of Isabella Martinez Chen, CEO of Chen Industries, woman who'd spent 3 months documenting every cruel word, every casual cruelty, every moment when they'd shown their true character. The silence on the floor was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. James Webb's mouth was slightly open. his confident smirk completely gone. Marcus Chen, whose last name was the same as mine, though he'd never bothered to notice, was staring like he'd seen a ghost. And David Rodriguez, the rising star who'd joked about my legal status, was gripping the edge of the conference table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Their smiles had faded before I even took a step toward the door. I walked past them without a word, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble they'd forced me to clean over and over again. Past the conference room where they sat frozen in their expensive suits. Past the break room where they'd scattered sugar packets on my freshly mopped floor. Past the hallway where they'd called me sweetheart and Maria and questioned whether I belonged in this country. I walked like I owned the place, because in about 15 minutes, I would. The elevator to the 20th floor, the executive floor. Robert Meridian's floor was waiting for me. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the 10th floor. Employees were starting to whisper among themselves. Phones were coming out. And in conference room B, 3 men were having what looked like a very difficult conversation with their boss. But that was their problem now. I had a business meeting to attend. The elevator climbed smoothly toward the top of the building, toward the boardroom where Robert Meridian was waiting, toward the conversation that would determine the future of both our companies. As we rose, above the city, above the morning traffic, and the people rushing to their jobs, and the ordinary world, where cleaning ladies were invisible and CEOs lived in different universes, I thought about my father. David Chen had started with nothing, built an empire through hard work and smart decisions, and taught me that the measure of a person wasn't what they accomplished when everyone was watching. It was what they did when they thought no one important could see. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 20th floor. The doors opened onto a hallway I'd never cleaned, a world I'd observed from below but never entered as myself. Robert Meridian was waiting for me, and he was smiling. "Ms. Martinez Chen," he said, extending his hand. "I believe we have some business to discuss. If Chapter 1 left you speechless, wait until you see what happens when the mask comes off completely. Make sure you're subscribed because this is about to get intense." The boardroom on the 20th floor was a cathedral of power. Floor to ceiling. Windows stretched along the walls, offering a panoramic view of Chicago that made the city look like a toy model spread out below. Lake Michigan stretched to the horizon, dotted with sailboats that looked like white specks from this height. The conference table was a single piece of mahogany that could easily seat 20 people, its surface polished to mirror perfection. Awards lined the walls: Forbes 40 Under 40, Chicago Business Person of the Year, framed photos of Robert Meridian shaking hands with senators, CEOs, even a former president. This was where empires were built and destroyed, where decisions worth billions of dollars were made over coffee and handshakes, where the real power in American business revealed itself. I'd cleaned rooms like this in other buildings, always wondering what it would feel like to sit at that table as an equal. Now I was about to find out. "Please sit," Robert Meridian said, gesturing toward the chair at the head of the table. His chair, the seat of power in a company worth $50 billion. "I have to say, this is the most interesting due diligence process I've ever been part of." I sat down slowly, feeling the supple leather conform to my body. The chair was still warm from the morning sun streaming through the windows. From here, I could see the entire city spread out below the loop with its canyon of skyscrapers, the river winding through downtown like a green ribbon, the neighborhoods stretching toward the horizon where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. "Mr. Meridian," I said, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the moment. "Thank you for seeing me, Robert," he corrected, taking the seat to my right. "And I think the thanks should go the other way. You've just given me a masterclass in corporate culture assessment that they don't teach at Harvard Business School." The door opened, and Patricia Hendricks entered with 2 other people, the woman with the briefcase and the corporate lawyer I'd seen earlier. Patricia was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of quiet competence that kept billion-dollar companies running smoothly. She'd always been polite during my time as Maria, nodding when she passed me in the hallways, saying good morning when our paths crossed. "Ms. Martinez Chen," Patricia said, extending her hand with a knowing smile, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you properly." I'm Patricia Hendricks, Robert's executive assistant. This is Jennifer Walsh from Goldman Sachs, and David Kim from Morrison & Forster, our legal counsel. I shook hands with each of them, noting the shift in their body language. 3 months ago, they would have looked right through me. Now they were treating me with the deference reserved for someone who controlled $8 billion in assets. Jennifer's been handling the financial aspects of our discussions, Robert explained as everyone took their seats, and David's been working on the legal framework. They've both been very curious to meet the mysterious buyer who insisted on such unconventional due diligence methods. Jennifer Walsh was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the sharp intelligence that Goldman Sachs demanded from its investment bankers. I have to admit, Ms. Martinez-Chen, when you first approached us about acquiring a stake in Meridian Financial, I never imagined this is how we'd end up meeting. Due diligence takes many forms. I replied, financial statements tell you about a company's past performance, but they don't tell you about its character. And what did you learn about our character? Robert asked, leaning back in his chair. There was something in his tone, not defensiveness, but genuine curiosity. He wanted to know what I'd discovered in my 3 months as an invisible observer. I thought about how to answer that question, about James Webb throwing a coffee cup on the floor just to watch me clean it up, about Marcus Chen scattering sugar packets across my freshly mopped floor for entertainment, about David Rodriguez questioning my legal status while I scrubbed toilets, about all the small cruelties and casual indignities I'd documented over 97 days of being treated as less than human. But I also thought about Rosa, who'd trained me with patience and kindness, about Carlos, the security guard who always asked about my family, about the dozens of other employees who'd treated me with basic human decency, who said good morning and thank you and please, who saw Maria Gonzalez as a person deserving of respect. I learned that Meridian Financial has incredible potential. I said finally, your financial products are innovative, your client base is solid, your growth trajectory is impressive, but you also have a problem. What kind of problem, David? Kim asked, his pen poised over his legal pad. A cultural problem. You have employees who believe their success gives them the right to dehumanize others, and that kind of toxicity spreads. Robert was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city below. Tell me about this morning. I pulled out my phone app, the cheap Android that Maria Gonzalez carried, but the latest iPhone Pro that Isabella Martinez-Chen used to run a multinational corporation. I opened the voice recording app and set it on the table. I recorded everything. I said simply, 3 months of conversations, interactions, incidents, all legally obtained while performing my duties as an employee of Chicago Premium Cleaning Services. I pressed play. The voices of James, Marcus, and David filled the boardroom, crystal clear through the phone's speakers. Hey lady, clean my office. 2, look at that. She's actually cleaning it up. Didn't even hesitate. Well, at least she's good at taking orders. These people, they need the work, you know. Can't afford to be picky. You think she's legal? I mean, working in the country. Legally. The recording continued for several minutes, capturing not just the words but the tone, the laughter, the casual cruelty of 3 men who thought they were untouchable. When it finished, the boardroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Jennifer Walsh looked sick. David Kim had stopped taking notes. Patricia Hendricks was shaking her head slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Robert Meridian looked like he wanted to put his fist through the mahogany table. How long has this been going on? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Based on my observations and conversations with other employees, years. This isn't new behavior, Robert. This is who they are when they think no one important is watching. I pulled out a tablet and opened a detailed report I'd been compiling. Carlos Rodriguez, your night security guard, they call him Boy, despite the fact that he's 63 years old and has been protecting this building for 3 decades. Rosa Martinez, who cleans the 14th floor. Marcus Chen made her redo his entire office because he didn't like how she'd arranged his papers, calling her you people in the process. The barista in your lobby cafe, they regularly short her on tips and make comments about her accent. Jesus Christ, Robert muttered. It gets worse. They have a group chat where they share photos and videos of service workers, making jokes about their appearance, their English skills, their immigration status. They rate the cleaning staff like their Yelp reviews. James Webb posted a video this morning of the mess he made in the break room, with the caption, "When you're having a rough morning, but at least you're not the cleaning lady." I swiped to another screen. David Rodriguez has been filing false complaints against maintenance workers to get them in trouble with their supervisors. Marcus Chen deliberately makes messes for the cleaning crew to find, timing how long it takes them to clean up. And James Webb, I paused, pulling up a particularly damning piece of evidence. James Webb has been systematically sabotaging the employee satisfaction surveys, making sure that complaints about executive behavior never reach HR. The room was dead silent. Robert was staring at the tablet screen like it contained nuclear launch codes. I have video evidence, audio recordings, screenshots of their group chat, testimony from affected employees, and a detailed timeline of incidents spanning the past 18 months. I continued, "This isn't just inappropriate behavior. Some of this crosses the line into harassment and potentially illegal discrimination." David Kim was writing furiously now, his legal mind already cataloging the potential liability. "Ms. Martinez Chen, are you planning to sue?" I finished. "No, I'm planning to buy." That got everyone's attention. "You see, gentlemen, I didn't spend 3 months documenting this behavior to destroy Meridian Financial. I did it to understand what I was buying, and what I learned is that underneath a layer of toxic management, you have something extraordinary here." I stood up and walked to the windows, looking down at the city where millions of people were starting their day, heading to jobs that might not make them rich, but gave them dignity and purpose. "Your rank and file employees are incredible," I continued. "I've worked alongside them for 3 months. They're dedicated, professional, hardworking people who take pride in what they do. Your client services team is responsive and thorough. Your research department produces some of the best analysis I've seen in the industry. Your operations staff keeps everything running smoothly despite having to work around the chaos created by executives who think they're untouchable." I turned back to face the table. "The problem isn't Meridian Financial. The problem is that you have a cancer, and cancer spreads if you don't cut it out." "What are you proposing?" Robert asked. I walked back to my seat, but didn't sit down. Instead, I placed both hands on the mahogany table and leaned forward, meeting Robert's eyes directly. "Partnership, not acquisition. 49% equity stake in Meridian Financial, with Chen Industries providing $8 billion in capital for expansion, but with conditions." Jennifer Walsh was already pulling out her laptop. "What kind of conditions?" "Complete restructuring of your HR policies, mandatory respect and inclusion training for all employees, starting with senior management, a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior or harassment of any kind, and immediate termination of the 3 individuals we discussed, James, Marcus, and David," Robert said. It wasn't a question. James, Marcus, and David. "Today, before the market closes." David Kim looked up from his notes. "Ms. Martinez Chen, from a legal standpoint, we need to be careful about wrongful termination claims. If we move too quickly." "David," I interrupted, "I have 97 days of documented evidence of harassment, discrimination, and potentially illegal behavior. I have recordings, videos, photos, and witness testimony. If they want to file wrongful termination suits, I welcome the discovery process." Robert was nodding slowly. "What else?" "I want to address the entire company. All employees, mandatory. Attendance. I want them to understand that this kind of behavior is no longer acceptable. And I want them to see that there are consequences for treating other human beings as less than human." "That's a big ask," Patricia said. "Some of our employees don't even know about the potential partnership yet." "Then it's time they learned. Transparency builds trust, and trust builds better businesses." I sat back down, my proposal laid out on the table like a challenge. $8 billion, Mr. Meridian, the largest partnership deal in your company's history. The resources to expand into new markets, develop new products, compete with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley on equal terms. All you have to do is Prove that Meridian Financial is the company you want it to be, not the company those three represent. The room was quiet except for the sound of Jennifer Walsh's fingers flying across her laptop keyboard and David Kim's pen scratching across legal pad pages. Robert was looking out the window again, but I could see his reflection in the glass. And I could see the moment when he made his decision. $8.5 billion. He said without turning around, "I'm sorry." He turned back to face me, and there was steel in his gray eyes. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. $8.5 billion. 60-40 split instead of 51-49. Full partnership, not investment, and I want those three gone within the hour." I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Deal. Jennifer, call the lawyers. David, start drafting termination papers for Webb, Chen, and Rodriguez. Patricia, I want an all-hands meeting scheduled for this afternoon. Every employee, no exceptions." "What about the Harrison acquisition?" Patricia asked. James was supposed to present to the clients this afternoon. "I'll handle the Harrison acquisition myself," Robert said. It's about time I remembered what it feels like to do the actual work, instead of just managing the managers. As the meeting broke up and people started making phone calls and sending emails, Robert walked over to where I was standing by the windows. "You know," he said quietly, 30 years ago, I started this company in a 2-car garage in Schaumburg. I was hungry, desperate, willing to do anything to succeed. I worked 18-hour days, slept on a cot in the office, ate ramen noodles for months because I was putting every penny back into the business. What changed? I asked. Success, growth, other people's money to manage. Somewhere along the way, I stopped getting my hands dirty. I started hiring people to handle the details, to manage the day-to-day operations, to deal with the problems I didn't want to think about. He paused, looking down at the street 20 floors below. I forgot what it felt like to be powerless. It's not too late to remember. No, he agreed. It's not. But it took someone with $8 billion and 3 months of cleaning toilets to remind me. An hour later, I was standing in the 20th floor executive bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror. My reflection showed Isabella Martinez Chen, CEO, billionaire, new partner in one of Chicago's most successful investment firms. But I was still wearing the navy blue uniform of Chicago Premium Cleaning Services. Still had calluses on my hands from 3 months of honest work. Still carried the smell of industrial cleaning supplies in my hair. I was changing out of the uniform when my phone buzzed. A text message from Robert. It's done. All 3 terminated. Security is escorting them out now. I finished changing into the spare business suit I kept in my car. A charcoal gray Armani that cost more than Maria Gonzalez made in a month, and took the elevator back down to the 10th floor. I wanted to see this for myself. The elevator doors opened onto a scene of barely controlled chaos. Employees were clustered in small groups, whispering urgently. Phones were buzzing with text messages and calls, and near conference room B, I could see 3 men in expensive suits carrying cardboard boxes, flanked by building security. James Webb looked shell-shocked. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something that looked like genuine fear. Marcus Chen was arguing with one of the security guards, his voice rising as he demanded to know who had authorized his termination. And David Rodriguez was just standing there, holding his box of personal belongings, staring at the floor where I'd mopped up his deliberately scattered coffee grounds. Just hours earlier, they saw me as I approached, and for a moment, time seemed frozen. 3 months of casual cruelty, 3 months of treating me as invisible, 3 months of thinking they were untouchable, all of it crystallizing in this single moment of recognition. "You," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're her. You're the one who..." "Isabella Martinez Chen," I said, extending my hand with a smile. "Pleasure to meet you. Though I believe we've met before. Several times, actually. None of them shook my hand. You set us up," Marcus accused. "This is entrapment or something. You can't do this." "Actually, I can. And I did, you see. Gentlemen, I spent 3 months getting to know the real Meridian Financial. Not the company you see in boardrooms and client presentations, but the company that exists when you think no one important is watching. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording app. I have 97 days of evidence documenting your behavior toward employees. You considered beneath you. Every cruel joke, every deliberate mess, every casual act of dehumanization. All legally obtained during my employment with Chicago Premium Cleaning Services. David Rodriguez found his voice. What do you want? Money. This is blackmail. I don't want your money, David. I have plenty of my own. What I wanted was to understand what kind of men you really are. When you think there are no consequences for your actions. I gestured toward their boxes of personal belongings. Now you understand that there are always consequences. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not obviously, but eventually the bill comes due. James was staring at me like I was a ghost. The coffee cup, you knew who I was, and you just cleaned it up. I cleaned it up because that was my job. Just like it was your job to treat employees with basic human decency. The difference is, I did my job, security was getting impatient, and the 3 former executives were escorted toward the elevators. But James paused at the last moment, turning back to face me. How long? He asked. How long have you been planning this? I've been planning to acquire a stake in Meridian Financial for 8 months, I replied. But I only decided to destroy your careers this morning, when you threw that coffee cup on the floor and laughed about it. The elevator doors closed on their stunned faces, and they were gone. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the main auditorium on the 5th floor. By 2:30. Word had spread throughout the building about the morning's events. The mysterious cleaning lady, who turned out to be a billionaire, the sudden termination of 3 senior executives, the announcement of a major partnership that would reshape the company's future. I took the stairs down from the 20th floor, wanting to walk through the building one more time as myself. Every floor told a story now. The 19th floor, where I'd overheard conversations about quarterly earnings and market strategies. The 15th floor, where I'd cleaned the break room that had become the scene of my revelation. The 10th floor, where I'd watched through glass walls as careers ended and new partnerships began. On the 5th floor, employees were filing into the auditorium. Accountants and analysts, administrative assistants and IT technicians, security guards and maintenance workers, people I'd worked alongside for 3 months. People who knew me as Maria but were about to meet Isabella. Carlos was there, looking confused but curious. Rosa was sitting in the 3rd row, whispering to another cleaning lady about the rumors she'd heard. The barista from the lobby cafe was checking her phone, probably reading the news stories that were already starting to appear online. At exactly 3 o'clock, Robert Meridian walked onto the stage. The auditorium fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, today marks a new chapter in the history of Meridian Financial. We're announcing a partnership with Chen Industries that will provide us with the resources to expand our operations, develop new products, and compete on a global scale. There was polite applause, but I could see the confusion on people's faces. This wasn't why they'd been called to a mandatory meeting. But before we discuss the future, Robert continued, we need to address some issues with our current culture. This morning, I learned that some employees in senior positions have been treating their colleagues, particularly our service staff, with disrespect and cruelty. The applause died away completely. The auditorium was dead silent. I want to be clear, this behavior is unacceptable. It does not represent the values of Meridian Financial, and it will not be tolerated going forward. Effective immediately. We have terminated 3 employees for violations of our harassment and discrimination policies. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People were pulling out phones, checking social media, texting colleagues who hadn't made it to the meeting. I also want you to meet our new partner, Robert said, gesturing toward the wings of the stage. Isabella Martinez Chen, CEO of Chen Industries. I walked out onto the stage to scattered applause, looking out at an audience that included dozens of people who had known me as Maria for the past 3 months. The confusion on their faces was palpable. Thank you, Robert, I said, stepping up to the microphone. Some of you know me already, though perhaps not by this name. For the past 3 months, I've been working in this building as an employee of Chicago Premium Cleaning Services. The murmurs turned into gasps. I could see Rosa's mouth fall open. Carlos was shaking his head in disbelief. I didn't do this to deceive anyone, I continued. I did it to understand what kind of company Meridian Financial really is. Not the company you see in annual reports and press releases, but the company that exists in daily interactions between colleagues, in moments when people think no one important is watching. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. What I learned is that most of you are extraordinary. You're professional, dedicated, and hardworking. You treat each other with respect and dignity, regardless of job title or salary level. You understand that every person who works in this building contributes to its success. There was scattered applause, growing stronger as people began to understand where this was going. But I also learned that a small number of employees have been creating a toxic environment for others. They've been treating service workers as less than human, making crude jokes about people's backgrounds and immigration status, and using their positions of authority to intimidate and humiliate their colleagues. The applause stopped. The auditorium was silent again. That behavior ended today. Going forward, Meridian Financial will have zero tolerance for harassment, discrimination, or any form of dehumanizing conduct. We will treat every employee with the respect they deserve, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. I looked directly at Rosa, at Carlos, at the other service workers scattered throughout the audience. Your work matters. Your dignity matters. You matter. And anyone who doesn't understand that will find themselves looking for a new job. The applause this time was thunderous. People were standing up, cheering, and I could see tears in some eyes. Rosa was clapping so hard I thought she might hurt her hands, but I wasn't finished. There's one more thing, I said, waiting for the applause to die down. Effective immediately, Meridian Financial will be implementing a profit-sharing program for all employees, not just executives, not just senior management, but everyone who contributes to this company's success. The cheering was so loud it shook the building. I could see people hugging each other, see the genuine joy and relief on faces throughout the auditorium. As I walked off the stage, Robert met me in the wings. Profit sharing wasn't part of our deal, he said with a grin. Consider it a signing bonus, I replied. Besides, it's just good business. Happy employees are productive employees. You know, Isabella, I think this partnership is going to work out very well. I thought about the Honda Civic in the parking garage, about the polyester uniform hanging in my office closet, about 3 months of being invisible and ignored and treated as less than human. I thought about my father, who had taught me that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of your humanity. Yes, I agreed. I think it will. That evening, I stood in the empty break room on the 15th floor, looking at the spot where James Webb had thrown his coffee cup on the floor just 12 hours earlier. The marble was spotless now, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, showing no trace of the casual cruelty that had taken place here. But I would never forget. Not the sound of ceramic shattering against stone, not the laughter that followed, not the way it felt to be treated as invisible by people who thought their success made them better than everyone else. I kept my cleaning uniform in my office closet, pressed and ready, a reminder of where I'd been, and why I'd never forget the view from the bottom looking up. Because the woman who cleaned these floors and the woman who now owned them, we were the same person. And that person had learned that true power isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them respect each other. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how to treat the people around you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to remember that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their job title, and subscribe, because these are the stories that matter, the ones that remind us of our shared humanity. See you in the next one.